Ed Kracz with me. I get to talk to Ed Kracz pretty much almost every Sunday in the press box, and now I get to bring those conversations to Good Morning NFC East. The brains behind John McMullen. Ed Kracz, everybody.
Can't wait to tell him that later today.
You know what he's gonna do? Roll my eyes, and he's just gonna roll his eyes, and I'll just be like, you know what? Jeff's an idiot. That's what I'll say. Jeff's an idiot.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
So how you been, Ed?
Hey, I'm great, man. Good to be with you this morning.
Yeah. So I guess I have to ask you, what was your number one? I guess your number one observation. I know you guys write observations for Sports Illustrated on pretty much every game, but what was your number one observation from Sunday if you had to pick one?
Well, Miles Sanders. It's hard not to say Miles Sanders with the game he had, but this pass rush, this Eagles pass rush, they haven't intercepted a pass now, I think in two games, right? Going back to the Green Bay Packers game, but man, they're getting so many sacks, and I love sacks. Being a former defensive end, I love getting after the quarterback. But I was just in high school, of course. I didn't play beyond that. But I love a sack. That's my favorite part of the game. So I'm always going to be pretty pumped up when the Eagles pass rush can get home or any pass rush. I just like seeing a quarterback go down. And the Eagles had 7 sacks, a couple against Daniel Jones, a couple against Tyrod Taylor. And Brandon Graham, I mean, what he might be my top observation, Jeff. I mean, 34 years old, be 35 in the spring. And I talked to him earlier in the week, which was interesting. And he talked about really essentially being kind of a closer on this team or someone that can come in short spurts because his play time has been reduced a little bit and make things happen. And he got 29 snaps against the Giants. He had 18 against the Titans. He had a sack against them. But he's so effective with the role that he's in. I mean, 3 sacks that's a lot of sacks, especially for a 34-year-old man coming off an Achilles injury. So to me, I think Brandon Graham specifically would be my top observation. But that pass rush, 7 sacks, they have 49 this year now after just 29 a season ago. That to me has been very impressive and really something I like to watch.
Yeah, 20 sacks in the last 4 games, if I'm not mistaken. I believe they're second in the NFL in sack rate. That was my one thing I learned from the game this week. I had to write one observation from every game, and that was number one thing I took from the Eagles too, just how good they are at getting to the quarterback, which we kind of knew, but they're taking it to a new level now. And I wanted to bring this up too. You mentioned Brandon Graham and the year he's having, and you mentioned the snap count. I'm looking at this as I think he's more efficient. Fletcher Cox, even Josh Sweat, Hassan Reddick, because they're not playing a full 60, 70 snaps on their body. They're only playing like 30 or 40. And do you think that's the reason why they've been so successful over the past couple of weeks?
I think there's no doubt about it. And they'll tell you that too. Graham said that it took him a little while to get used to that role. Really only one game, he said, because I followed up and said, well, how long did it take you to get adjusted to this reduced role that you have now? And he said, really after the first game. So he's on board with it. And these guys realize that, they're not 23 or 24 years old anymore, and they can't play, 60, 70% of the snaps. They're better when they are rested during in game. And, Fletcher Cox will talk about it too. Everybody thought, well, here comes Ndamukong Suh, and they signed him. He's going to take some of Fletcher's snaps. How happy is he going to be about that? But, Cox told me he's fine with it. He understands that, the rigors of a season. And this isn't even a 16-game NFL season anymore. You got the one extra game. So, you really have to pace yourself through the course of this, 3 or 4 month marathon of an NFL season. And that's what's helping these guys. There's no doubt about that. Now, of course, you have guys like Hassan Reddick. He's 28 years old, I think. He's still on the younger side in his prime. He's at double-digit sacks again, 3rd straight year. So, that was a great piece to add. But when you look at this difference now in the 20 sacks more they have this year than they had last year, I mean, Reddick certainly huge difference. Having BG back, big difference. That's 18 and a half sacks with 2 guys. I mean, that accounts for that difference of 20 plus sacks over a year ago. But you still have guys like Javon Hargrave, career high 8 sacks. Fletcher Cox now, he's had a sack in each of the last 3 games. He's up to 6. Josh Sweat kind of gets overlooked in the whole thing. He's at a career high now, 7.5. He had 7.5 last year, 7.5 this year. 4 games to go. He'll probably set his career high. So it's great to watch the quarterback get sacked. And the Eagles had the team record, Jeff, I think is 62 back 62. In 1984. And I did a little research on that. And Clyde Simmons, I mean, look at the defensive line the Eagles had back then. I don't know if your viewers are probably too young to remember this, but, Clyde Simmons had 15.5. Reggie White had, I think, 11.5, and Jerome Brown, 10.5. I mean, they were just, these are legendary guys in the Eagles organization, or in Eagles history, I should say. Simmons, White, Brown. And now you have guys, 50 years later, guys like Reddick and Graham and Cox and Sweat and Hargrave. I mean, these are guys that are going to be legendary figures in this organization the further we get away from 2022.
What I love about this team is they're not coverage sacks either. They are getting to the quarterback at a significantly fast rate. I believe they're 4th in the NFL in time to get a sack. And they go by quickest, obviously. So what say you, Ed? Like, do you think overall with this team and this pass rush, and especially with what they got at cornerback on with Darius Slay, James Bradbury, this defense can end up as the top 3 defense in the league?
It's certainly trending that way, no doubt. And, it all works together. Jonathan Gannon will tell you it's cover, rush, cover. They help one another. But you're right. The Eagles are getting off the ball quickly. And, one of the things we heard whenever they don't get home is, well, the quarterback's getting rid of the ball quickly. Well, you're not hearing that because that first option is being taken away by a very good secondary. So the quarterback does have to hold the ball a split second longer, and that's all they need. I mean, you see these ends with Sweat and Reddick coming off the edge and making life tough for quarterbacks. And then the pressure up the middle, with Cox and Hargrave, and, even Milton Williams is putting pressure on a quarterback. So I think it just works hand in hand. There'll be games where the rush is going to need an extra second, and that's what the secondary will have to provide. But I don't see any reason, Jeff, why they can't go top 3 defense in this league. And then we'll see what happens with Jonathan Gannon and his head coaching candidacy in the offseason for what he's been able to do with this defense. And I contended all along, even last year when the defense was kind of up and down, I said I think it's personnel related. I think it's a personnel situation. It's not Gannon as much as it is as he doesn't have the horses to drive what he wants to do. And now he does, and we're seeing the result of what, this scheme can produce.
Say Jonathan Gannon does get a head coaching job this offseason, which it does look like he's got a shot. I think D'Amico Ryans is first on the defensive tree, then it's him. But say he does get a job. Do they call Vic Fangio because he basically runs Fangio's defense anyway?
Yeah, that's interesting. I would think they might try to promote from within.
Denard Wilson might be.
Denard Wilson, Darius Slay has mentioned how, what a bright mind he is. And, he's kind of fits that I don't want to say that mold for the Eagles coach. It's a young staff, right? Aside from guys like, Jeff Stoutland and Tracy Rocker. It's a fairly young staff. But it would be interesting to see what they do. I think, Wilson, I'd like to see them give him an opportunity, and maybe, Fangio, maybe he doesn't get a job. Maybe he remains as a consultant, or maybe they bring him in as a senior defensive consultant. I don't know what his situation is with the contract that he still has after he got fired as a head coach from, what was it, the Broncos?
Yeah.
So I'm not sure, but I would like to see them do Denard Wilson. And I'll tell you something else. Shane Steichen, I think, should get a head coaching job. I think some smart organization out there, instead of like throwing money at like a Harbaugh at Michigan, I've heard his name mentioned, trying to get Harbaugh back in the NFL. I think Shane Steichen, what he's done in helping develop Jalen Hurts, and I know it takes a village to do what Hurts has done this year, and, a lot of credit has to go to Hurts, but, you have Brian Johnson in his ear and Shane Steichen. And for what the Eagles do to start games, I mean, they've scored touchdowns in 6 of their last 7 games on their first possession. That speaks volumes as to what they're putting together in a game plan to start games. Those opening scripts that the coaches use. Steichen gets a lot of credit for that, and he knows how to manage a game. He knows how to call a game, and I think he would be a great candidate to be a head coach at some point, maybe even this offseason.
Yeah, and I've told people on this show, I told people pretty much on every radio show I go on, not just what Shane Steichen did in Philadelphia, all the conversations I have with Justin Herbert and what he meant to Justin Herbert's career.
Yeah.
And Justin Herbert has said, Philadelphia got a good coach, and this is when he got hired but by the Eagles. And that's why I always wonder if the Chargers have a coaching vacancy. I know Sean Payton's going to be linked to them, but how impressive would it be if they would just bring Shane Steichen back and say, you know what, Shane, you're the head coach and you get to work with Justin again. And Justin Herbert's already good, but can you imagine how good he'd be or how even better he'd be with his old offensive coordinator back?
Yeah, you wonder how many head coaching openings there's going to be, right? I mean, who's going to look at it? Even in Dallas, Kellen Moore, his name has gotten mentioned too. I mean, he would be, I think, a good candidate to look at as well. And Byron Leftwich, I think he would be a good candidate. And Eric Bieniemy in Kansas City, he never seems to get, any serious consideration for a head coaching job. So there are plenty of good candidates out there. It's always who's the hottest candidate at that time. And the Eagles at 12-1, probably going to finish with 14, 15, 16 wins. I don't know. But whatever it is, I mean, certainly the Eagles coaches have to be considered some of the hottest candidates out there, right? So depends how many openings there are. Carolina's got one, Indy's got one, and then we'll see what happens, on what do they call it, Bloody Monday or Black Monday?
Black Monday, I think
Black
they call
Monday.
it.
Yeah, that's the season ends, or whatever. We'll see who gets let go and how many openings there are. There always seems to be like at least 5 or 6 each year, right? Head coaching openings. So, and there's plenty of candidates to fill them, in my opinion. But I like Steichen again and a lot just for what they've done in their 2 years here in Philadelphia. And they have to be considered hot candidates.
What's crazy is, too, Ed, you mentioned about 6 or 7 candidates right off the bat that weren't Steichen again, which makes me think, even though they probably should get head coaching jobs, the chances they come back next year, and it does look possible. I mean, Steve Wilkes looks like he's going to be the guy in Carolina. They're 4-4 with him. So
yeah,
you could take that out. I mean, I'm assuming Arizona might have an opening. Chargers, all depends what Brandon Staley does. I don't think the Raiders are going to get rid of Josh McDaniels because of the contract. The Saints might have an opening, but there's rumors Payton might go back there now. So, there may not be enough seats at the table, and one of the two may be coming back.
Yeah, and we'll see what the Texans do. We'll see what the Broncos do. Is Hackett a one-and-done guy? I mean,
he should be.
Yeah, probably. Obviously Russell Wilson's a big problem there in Denver too. I mean, is it more Russell Wilson or is it more Hackett for not taking advantage of what Wilson can do? I don't know, but there's always a couple surprises. I'm trying to think who else might be, moving on from their current head coach, but that sounds about the list. And you wonder about Bill Belichick in New England. Like, at what point is he going to call it a career? Right? I mean, the Patriots they're a solid team, but they're not a Super Bowl team by any stretch. I mean, they won last night, 7-6. Still have to fight to get into the playoffs. But you wonder how much longer Bill Belichick is going to do this. And I know we talk about that every year, but it would certainly be a surprise if he decides to retire. And who knows?
And Mac Jones had another blow up with Matt Patricia last night.
Yeah.
I don't understand. I still don't understand. As good of a coach as Belichick has been, and Andy Reid has done this too, why would you switch a guy on the other side of the ball? It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, you're right. Andy Reid did that, and that kind of led to the beginning of the end for him here in Philadelphia, moving Juan Castillo, right, from offensive guy to defensive coordinator. So, yeah, it's really interesting that he would do that with Matt Patricia. And even Joe Judge, it's kind of a muddied situation there calling plays, how that whole process operates offensively. And you're right, Mac Jones is just visibly frustrated with what's going on. He's waving off the play call that's coming in, and, his body language just shows that he's frustrated. He's not happy with the situation there. So there's going to be some kind of change, I would think, in New England. Maybe Bill Belichick says, you know what, I've had enough of this, and I'm just going to step down and, you know, count my days until I get into the Hall of Fame.
That's the other thing too. He always, I think Troy Aikman pointed it out last night. He always seemed to have a succession plan for in case Josh McDaniels left. Like he had one years ago when Josh McDaniels was going to go to the Colts. It seems like he just doesn't have that anymore. Like that's who you went with, Joe Judge and Matt Patricia. Like you couldn't find anybody on the open market that could run an offense or what you wanted to do. He always seemed to be one step ahead when he lost an assistant. It just doesn't feel like he's like that anymore.
Yeah, and even somebody on his own staff to just kind of turn away from an internal candidate. I don't know what his staff looks like on the offensive side of the ball, but I always like, that transition from promoting from within, like we talked about with maybe Denard Wilson on defense, and maybe even on offense, they promote a guy like Brian Johnson, the quarterback coach, to offensive coordinator should Steichen leave. I mean, I kind of like that transition, and we saw that with Andy Reid during his heyday in the O's. He always had that plan in place for when his tree started to grow those branches and guys started to leave for other jobs. He had guys ready in-house, and I like the in-house candidates. I always think that's a good plan to have. Is you continue with what you're doing. You know what's going on inside that building. You know the players know you, and it seems like it would be a seamless transition. But for some reason, Belichick doesn't have that anymore, or at least he didn't this past year. So, it's surprising to say the least.
It's crazy how we're talking this badly about a team that's 7-6, and right now the 7th seed in the AFC. If they win out, they're going to make the playoffs. So
yeah.
I just think we're not used to the Patriots not being the Patriots. They're not contenders. But another team that's been on a free fall, we watched Sunday, the Giants.
Yeah,
and I still think they might get in just because the Seahawks are faltering. I think the Lions need a lot of help, but they're winning. But it doesn't feel like the winner of the Giants-Commanders game this week gets in.
Yeah, I think they have certainly a pretty strong leg up to get in. But again, even the loser, like you say, maybe the loser's not done either. I know that, there are a few NFC East matchups that, coming down the stretch here that are going to determine whether or not all 4 teams from the NFC East get in, which would be just nuts. But there's been really no other team other than maybe the Lions. The Lions are playing well, but is it a little too much too late or whatever? Is it a little too late for them? It's going to be interesting to see. Everybody laughed at that line. Like, how can the Lions be favored by 2.5 over the Vikings? And, proved to be the right line. The Vikings went down in flames against the Lions. So no other team has risen up to kind of grab, these couple wild card spots, except for the Commanders and the Giants. I mean, the Giants, like you said, they're kind of crumbling a little bit. I know injuries have kind of torpedoed their season a little bit. But listen, every team has injuries, and maybe they've had a few more than others. But it's about the depth. And I'll say this about the Eagles. I mean, Howie Roseman's done a good job of putting some depth pieces in place to withstand injuries. Look at Dallas Goedert's injury. He's probably coming back this week to play in Chicago on Sunday. But the Eagles were 4-0 without him. And there was a lot of concern, like, oh my gosh, the Eagles should have got a tight end to back up Goddard. But they had confidence in Stoll and Calcaterra. And we've seen these guys grow in their new roles with Dallas Goedert out. And again, a credit to Shane Steichen, Jason Michael, the position coach for the tight ends, for having these guys ready, and for Steichen for understanding what they can and can't do and taking advantage of those strengths. So I know the Giants have had maybe more injuries than other teams. I know their wide receiver core was decimated. Their secondary was banged up, but and they didn't have the depth. I mean, they had salary cap problems to start this season, and the fact they got off to a 6-1 start was like, wow, man, that's really surprising, because you thought this isn't going to be a good year for the Giants. They're cutting guys like James Bradbury, for heaven's sakes. They're going to win 4 games or 5 games. So, I give them credit really for being still in the hunt, and they could get in the playoffs, and they haven't been in the playoffs in a very long time. So that would be a really big step for that organization to get into the postseason, experience it, let Daniel Jones taste it a little bit, and then see what 2023 holds. So I give them credit. even though they are kind of crumbling a little bit here toward the end. But that is a huge game Sunday night with the Commanders, no doubt.
Yeah, I'm excited for that one for sure. And I'm glad you pointed out the Eagles' offensive line. I never get to ask people what I think the biggest strength of this team is because personally, I do think it's the offensive line. But we were talking about this late in the game Sunday. All the guys that were in on the second team on that offensive line, and the Giants' first teamers just couldn't even touch Gardner Minshew. Could not touch him. Could the Eagles' second string offensive line start on at least 15, 20 NFL teams?
That's a lot of teams. Maybe. I mean, maybe not as a whole, but certainly there's some guys maybe capable of it. But maybe as a whole, yeah. I mean, and that's always been where Howie has spent a lot of his money is on that offensive line, right? And their depth is really, really good there. I mean, they lost guys during the season. They cut Nate Herbig. Gets picked up right away. Coyote Owasika, an undrafted free agent, he's starting. Jack Anderson was cut by the Eagles, and he's starting with the Giants because of their offensive line issues. But yeah, I mean, they're really good on that offensive line. And you're right, that's probably the strength of the team. And there would be a lot of NFL teams that would love to have some of those guys and aren't starting in Philadelphia on that offensive line. But I'll take it even one step further, Jeff. I think their defensive line now is maybe one of the best in the league too. I mean, I know Dallas has a good one, and there's some other good ones, the 49ers. But this Eagles defensive line, they don't take a back seat to too many teams, if any. And when you're strong like that on both sides of the ball on the line, that's going to win you a lot of ball games. And that's what we've seen with the Eagles so far.
I think you mentioned it best there, Ed, earlier in this segment. When you talk about the Eagles defensive line, they don't have a Michael Parsons. They don't have a Nick Bosa. They don't have a TJ Watt. But they have a bunch of players with 8 sacks or 7 sacks. If you look at just the numbers, like personally, in my opinion, I think Josh Sweat might be the best defensive lineman, the best edge rusher on that team, but he just doesn't have the sacks that Son Reddick or Brandon Graham had. But he's getting to the quarterback the most out of any of them.
Yeah, and I like his celebration. He does the old sweat thing off the brow. It's very understated. You can't get hurt doing it. Like I always worry about Hargrave when he does that karate kick. Like, is he going to pull something there? Or, Sweat made the Pro Bowl last year. So it's not like he's kind of an unknown guy or flying under the radar, but I still think he kind of flies under the radar a little bit. But I think, you mentioned all those guys and their sacks. I think, one of the Eagles PR people, John Ganode, put out a stat that this is the first time the Eagles have ever had, I think it's 4 players with at least 6 sacks in a season, with Cox, Hargrave, Sweat, and Reddick. That's pretty remarkable that that's the case. But here we are. And I think the defensive line deserves a lot of credit. And even Tracy Rocker, another assistant coach, you could talk about him. It's all just not Nick Sirianni. It's these guys that are under him that don't get a lot of credit because they work in the shadows. And, people don't know their names as readily because they don't talk to the media or anything like that. But, Tracy Rocker has done a good job with that defensive line.
And then you got the linebacker situation too with TJ Edwards and Kaiser White. And Nakobe Dean got a cup of coffee last week and he was making plays. So it does feel like this team, no matter who they lose this offseason, they're going to lose some guys, obviously, because that's the way the NFL works. It just seems like they have more than adequate replacements.
Again, it comes down to depth other teams don't have, like the Giants, maybe even like the Commanders. We see some injuries in Washington that they just don't have the right guys to kind of step in and keep that, that train on the tracks until the starters get back. But you have to credit, again, Howie Roseman and working in conjunction with his coaching staff. His coaches tell them what they need or what they like in a player, and how he goes out and tries to find them. It's the success this organization has had. What is it? The playoffs in 5 of the last 6 years. They just won a Super Bowl 5 years ago. And now here we are 5 years later with basically, a new team. I know you still have key players in place with Kelsey and Johnson and Graham and Cox, but he pretty much washed this roster clean from that 2017 Super Bowl, and they're back here on the doorstep competing for another one. You don't see that from a lot of organizations.
I gotta ask you this before I let you go, Ed. You've covered the Eagles now. How long has it been? It's been a long time.
Yeah, I think this is my 12th year
Yeah.
doing the Eagles for a
So
couple different
yeah,
outlets, but yeah,
yeah,
12 years.
yeah. 12 years overall. Is this the best Eagles team you've ever covered?
Uh, yeah, I was just having that conversation. Maybe it was with you in the press box up
I
in New
think it. I
York.
think it was with me. It was
Like,
either me or McMullen. It was one of us.
like what team? Like the 2017 team or the 2022 team? And I was talking about this. I'm a wrestling coach here in my school district at high schools, and I was talking about this with some of my guys. Like, who would you take? The 2017 team or the 2022 team? And everybody thinks the 2022 team would win, but these are 18, 17, 16-year-old kids that were like 10, 11, 12 when the Eagles won it last. So I think it's really interesting when you do a position by position breakdown of those two teams, who would win. This is certainly up there. I mean, we'll see how the whole thing ends up. It could be the best team I've covered, but right now that 2017 team did it. They won the Super Bowl, and they were 13-3, I think, that year, right? And they gave away that last game. I think they lost 6-0 to the Cowboys because they didn't need the game. They were already the number one seed, so they could have conceivably been 14-2. That's a pretty good run for a team like that. And they had a lot of injuries, and again, depth really rose to the top and helped that team get over the hump. But yeah, I would say 2017 still, Jeff, but I say it not very confidently because I think this team could be it, but we'll see where it ends for them.
It's a fun exercise for sure. That
Yeah.
that team 04. I know 02 didn't win the championship game, but they were loaded too.
Yeah.
There's a lot of good teams in there where you're just be like, okay, could this team beat this team because me personally, the 02 and 04 teams were two of the best teams I've ever seen, and that includes 17.
You're right. I was like a third guy back then. Reuben Frank. I was at the newspaper. Reuben Frank wrote for, so he was the number one guy. I was like the number three. I was the deep sidebar guy on that 04 team. I did go to Jacksonville, for the Super Bowl against the Patriots. They lost 24-21. So that was a darn good team. I mean, their cornerbacks were terrific too. So yeah, I guess you have to throw them into the mix too. But as far as a full-time Eagles writer since 2011 or 2012, whatever 12 years is, 2022 and 2017, keep juggling them and see how this thing ends up.
Once again, Ed, I appreciate your time. I appreciate you coming on. I know you're on pretty much every JAKIB Sports platform I can think of. I always see you on with Rick. I see you on Birds 365. Always got I'm losing my train of thought here. It's Tuesday, and we just had a big win last night at Bordertown. So
I saw that.
Yeah.
Maybe 60 or something, right? Wasn't it like 90?
Yeah, 90 is it. We didn't play good defense, though. I wasn't too happy.
No. Yeah. Shot the ball well, apparently.
Oh, we did. I think I'm trying to remember our stats now. I think we were 12 of 40 from 3, but we shoot a lot of threes anyway, so it helps. We're definitely a fast-paced team. But once again, Ed, gotta have you on again. I'm sure. Are you going to be on any other JAKIB Sports media platforms this week?
Yeah, I am. With Jody and John on I think Thursday, and maybe with Rick tomorrow. So yeah, you'll hear me again for sure. I enjoyed doing it, love doing it. Thankful for you guys having me on for sure.
Of course, Ed. And once again, I'll have to have you on Good Morning NFC East again. I said this the first week to you, by the way. Oh yeah, I'm gonna have you on in a couple of weeks, and what was it, like 4 months later?
Yeah, I know. And I know you asked me to go on a couple of weeks ago. I was battling the flu, and I took a rain check, so I'm glad you asked again.
Well, we all know the catalyst for that one.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
All right, then.
Starts with John and ends with McMullen.
Yeah,
right?
I was gonna say
John.
The brains behind John McMullen. Ed Kracz. You can say that to him whenever you text him. Whenever you talk to him today, and yeah, I'm sure I'll get a text from him saying Jeff's an idiot.
Yeah.
I appreciate you coming on, Ed.
My pleasure, Jeff. Thanks. Have a good day.
Yeah, sounds great.